Lieutenant Commander Aurora, Rory Vale, had perfected the art of being nobody. At 43, she moved through Falcon Ridge Air Logistics Center like smoke through a room, present but unnoticed, essential but unremarkable. Her sun-bleached sedan occupied the same distant parking spot every morning. Her stride measured the same perimeter path past satellite dishes that pointed towards secrets she no longer carried. The white streak above her right temple told a story she'd never share. Syrian Ridge. Lightning storm. 2 wounded operators dragged through mud while mortars screamed overhead. The electrical discharge that scorched her scalp had been the least of her worries that night. Now it served as her only visible scar, mistaken by younger staff for premature stress from pushing papers. If only they knew. Building 9 housed the base's logistics department, a maze of pale green corridors where Rory processed requisition codes for hydraulic seals and compressor blades. Her office window faced a service alley used by pre-dawn garbage trucks. She preferred it that way. Monotony was her ally, attention her enemy. 3 items remained from her former life, hidden in plain sight. The titanium dog tags against her. Sternum, cold as January steel. A carved cedar token in her wallet that still smelled like home and had once bought her 30 precious seconds at a hostage gate in Chad. And the miniature leather case tucked deep in her canvas messenger bag. Inside that case lay a pin no bigger than a postage stamp, a matte black falcon clutching a lightning bolt whose tail split into 4 talons. Special Operations Directive 4, Red Falcon. Officially, it had never existed. 50 pins had been minted. 32 operators were dead. 4 missing. 13 buried so deep in classified identities they could walk past their own mothers unchallenged. Rory was the 14th, but she'd chosen a different kind of disappearance. She'd signed the remission clause, surrendered operational privileges, and vanished into the administrative machinery of military bureaucracy. On this blistering Wednesday morning in June, 2 things happened that would shatter her carefully constructed invisibility. First, an encrypted communication arrived from Joint Special Operations Command. A routine request for ground-level logistics projections for a black extraction theater east of longitude 50. The coordinates made her stomach clench with recognition, but she filed it away with professional detachment. Second, building. 9's badge reader shorted out. The malfunction rerouted all personnel through the West Checkpoint, a heavily militarized gate, usually reserved for flight crews and munitions convoys. As Rory approached the serpentine queue of 50 agitated workers, she recognized the power-drunk swagger of the gate staff. They lived for moments like this, when regular support workers were forced into their domain. Clipboard Sergeant, nobody, knew his real name paced the line in mirrored sunglasses, barking orders at people who normally never crossed his path. His uniform was pressed to razor sharpness, his boots polished to mirrors. Every gesture screamed of a man drunk on small authority. Rory kept her gaze down, rehearsing her cover story. Logistician. Civilian equivalent GS-12. Access level 2. No anomalies. When her turn came, she placed the canvas bag on the conveyor belt with practiced calm. The scanner beeped once routine, but Private Bradford, monitoring the X-ray screen, frowned at something denser than coaxial connectors. "Ma'am, do you have any metallic pins or electronics not declared?" Rory's voice carried the measured monotone of bureaucratic compliance. "No prohibited electronics. Just tools and personal items. Feel free to inspect." She could have flashed a dormant priority clearance and walked through untouched. The remission clause had deactivated her field privileges, but not the nuclear-level access code embedded in her ID card. Instead, she chose submission. It was safer. Bradford's badge sat crooked on his chest, acne burning red under harsh fluorescent light. He gestured to a stainless steel table and began emptying her bag like a child unwrapping presents. Travel mug, notebook, microdriver set, cedar token, oatmeal packets. Each item clattered into a plastic tray under the hungry eyes of gathering. Security staff. Clipboard sergeant drifted over, scenting entertainment. Soon a half-circle of bored guards leaned against the rail, elbows propped, waiting for anomaly. Bradford reached the final zipper. Rory's pulse quickened, but her expression remained stone. The leather case tumbled out, weightless yet urgent, landing beside oil-stained work gloves. Time slowed as Bradford flipped it open. The Black Falcon caught the overhead light with a shimmer so subtle most people would miss it. But those who knew that microscopic fraction of military personnel whose clearances scraped the stratosphere recognized absolutes in that shimmer. No fail missions. Bodies buried under desert moons. A single radio call that could redirect satellites. Bradford saw a bird and a lightning bolt. Clipboard sergeant saw the end of his world. The room's chatter collapsed. Somewhere behind the scanners, a phone rang twice and stopped silent alarm to supervisory control. Sergeant lowered his mirrored shades, pupils constricted, breath hissing between clenched teeth. What he said next was almost a whisper, but it carried through the checkpoint like a rifle crack. Nobody moves. The shift in power was seismic. 2 MPs materialized as if conjured, hands resting on holsters. Their eyes betrayed ignorance. They didn't know what they were guarding, only that their sergeant suddenly acted like he stood beside a live bomb. Rory raised her hands slowly, palms outward, a gesture of compliance that also positioned her fingers centimeters from her ID lanyard. One swipe would invoke codes that would dissolve this tableau beneath a wave of black-level overrides. But she waited, observed, calculated. An unmarked SUV screeched to a halt outside. The 2 officers who entered wore midnight blue dress uniforms with no rank pins, no name tags, only the subdued patch of Air Combat Command stitched into their shoulders. Clipboard sergeant's face drained to chalk as the taller officer barked. His name, Sergeant Fields. Explain. Fields gestured to the table, mouth working soundlessly. The tall officer's gaze shifted to the emblem, and Rory watched déjà vu ripple across features, schooled never to reveal emotion. He composed himself, inhaled, then looked directly at her. Not at her ID, not at the bag, but at her, as if scanning. Bone for barcodes. Lieutenant Commander Vale, he said. Statement, not question. Why is a Red Falcon operator moving through this gate without escort? A dozen heads pivoted toward her. The phrase Red Falcon detonated quietly in the checkpoint, blowing holes in every assumption about the plain woman in logistics khakis. Rory spoke for the first time since the humiliation started, her voice low, measured, polished smooth by years of silence. Because, Colonel, this operator signed remission on a non-combatant clerk. Paragraph 12C authorizes independent base transit under standard protocols. The colonel's eyes flicked to Fields, to Bradford, to the silent MPs, then back to Rory. Paragraph 12C also stipulates operators travel without identifiers that compromise their remission. Care to explain why that pen is in your possession? Rory exhaled through her nose weariness, not defiance. Because I was advised to keep it. A reminder. Of what? She didn't add. She didn't need to. The colonel weighed responses, politics simmering behind his eyes. Security staff fidgeted, shrinking beneath tensions they couldn't name. Finally, he nodded once, curt. Sergeant, return her property. Log a procedural error. Then clear this gate within the hour. Fields opened his mouth to protest. The colonel cut him down with a glance. That's an order. Bradford swept items back into Rory's bag with trembling hands. When he reached the leather case, he hesitated, holding it like it might electrocute him. Rory took it gently, slid it into the bag, zipped the pocket, and slung the canvas strap over her shoulder. No apology came. Humiliation never rewinds. But as she stepped past the metal detector, voices chased her down the corridor, whispers, thick with speculation, fear, and newfound respect. By the time Rory reached Building 9, she had tamped the episode into a tight compartment in her mind. Yet its aftershocks crept through the day like hairline fractures. The JSOC request now looked less random. Phone calls she couldn't trace pinged her extension, then vanished. Even the breeze outside smelled sharper, as if reality itself had shifted tint. At 1500 hours, a courier delivered a sealed envelope bearing no return code. Inside, a single sheet, black ink on gray cardstock. Red Falcon recall protocol effective immediately. Remission suspended under Article 7. Report to hangar. 6, 1900 hours. Signature redacted. Heat surged from her spine to throat. Article 7 recall was myth, the nuclear option of clandestine governance. It meant a scenario so critical, so temporally constrained, that the living assets of an erased unit were considered the only failsafe. She counted the hours to 1900, felt each second land like a weight on a scale tipping back toward the woman she had tried so hard to bury. Around her, Building 9 chattered with normalcy printers spooling manifests, keyboards tapping freight codes, while in her mind, hangar doors yawned over black projects and ghosts long thought buried. At 1830, she closed her computer, locked the drawers, and left the office exactly as the janitorial checklist required. Trash emptied, blinds half dropped, desktop cleared. Habits of order survive catastrophe. She walked the service alley past dumpsters humming with flies, past the chain link fence where prairie grass bent beneath hot wind, toward the flight line where hangars crouched like dark animals against a bruised sky. Every step stripped a layer of civilian pretense until only muscle memory guided her. Breathe through the heels. Scan quadrants. Catalog exits. The sun bled orange across the tarmac, its dying light catching the curved aluminum of an aircraft she hadn't seen in 13 years. A stealth reconnaissance bird, officially decommissioned, now glimmering like a resurrected god at the mouth of Hangar 6. Two silhouettes waited under its wing, both draped in matte black flight suits that only Red Falcon alumni ever wore. The taller figure raised a hand, not a wave, but a signal code spelling Valkyrie, Rory's old call sign. Static roared in her ears as she reached the edge of shadow. The smaller silhouette stepped forward, night vision eyes, gravel voice. Long time, Vale. Rashed, she answered, surprised at the steadiness of her own tone. I was told you were KIA. He shrugged, scarred mouth twitching. Reports of my death were a strategic necessity. Then he jerked a thumb toward the bird. Wheels up in 40. Briefing inside. We're going back. Back where? She almost asked, but part of her already knew. East of 50 East, in a desert whose sand still bore the imprint of her kneeling form as she whispered extraction codes into a blood-slick radio. The day Red Falcon disbanded. The past wasn't done with any of them. Inside Hangar 6, sound died like prayers in a cathedral. Cold concrete echoed faintly beneath every footstep. Floodlights glowed soft and surgical across the underbelly of the recon jet, casting distorted silhouettes against metallic walls. The third figure leaned, unreadable, wrapped in silence like a shroud remained near. A folding table where a single screen displayed a frozen satellite frame of terrain Rory hadn't seen in over a decade. Desert. Not just any desert, but the kind that didn't appear on conventional maps, where rivers dried mid-sentence and villages collapsed under wind and rumor. In the image, a compound of low, whitewashed structures ringed by fencing that cast no shadow, guarded by figures too pixelated to identify, except one. In the center courtyard, an outline Rory recognized immediately, the bent knee of a man. In submission, hands bound behind him, shadowed by two figures in asymmetrical gear. But it wasn't the kneeling prisoner that froze her blood. It was the object beside him. A box, matte black, barely larger than a backpack. Unmistakable. She spoke before she could stop herself. That can't be. That unit was destroyed. The silent figure turned. Lieutenant Julia Kane, call sign Moth. Last seen 7 years ago, presumed lost during a failed intercept in the Caspian corridor. Her face was unmistakable older. Yes, the softness weathered away, but her stare still carried that strange, deliberate weight that once could silence entire briefings. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just gestured toward the screen. That box wasn't part of the failed program. It's a successor. And it's active. Rory exhaled slowly, mind catching up to implications. If it was active, then someone had access to the original encryption, to the Red Falcon archives, to material that had been promised, locked forever in an Arctic server silo with a suicide berm built into the core. Rashid grunted, crossed his arms. We think the box was moved 2 weeks ago. Not by JSOC, not by anyone on the Five Eyes grid. This was internal. Deep internal. Moth tapped twice on the screen. A new image flickered into place, another satellite frame. This one of a downed drone scattered across rock, partially disassembled. She pointed to a marking on one of the inner fins. Rory squinted. It was faint, worn, barely distinguishable through pixelation. But there it was, a falcon, partially burned away. One of their old birds. The implication wasn't just betrayal, it was resurrection. Someone's taken pieces of Red Falcon, Rashid said, leaning forward. Scraps, relics, forgotten tech. Reassembled them into something operational, something mobile, something pointed. At the wrong side of the board. Kane added, voice cold. We don't know who yet. But the compound's in Helmand Province. Civilian cover. Last operatives who went in joint Italian-SIGINT team went dark. All we got was this. She held up a small object between gloved fingers. Rory recognized the material instantly. Carbon weave. Dog tags, standard issue only to Deep Cloak operatives. The code etched into it made her blood stop. It was hers. Or rather, it was her backup alias, a decoy identity used only once in a mission that had never been declassified. Now someone had retrieved it. For the first time in years, Rory felt the edges of herself reconfiguring. Not just muscle memory, not just instinct, but something deeper. Purpose. The kind of cold, clean purpose that eroded fear. She nodded once, slowly. They're baiting us. Whoever this is, they knew we'd come. Kane said nothing. Rashid muttered, and we're going anyway. Rory looked at the recon jet's wing, sleek, silent, still warm from calibration. What's the window? 17 hours. Extraction must happen in 6. Infill happens at 0300 local. Kane paused. You'll go in alone. They'll spot more than one. I assumed as much. Kane reached into a case beside the monitor and pulled out a patch-stitched black thread. The falcon and bolt, same as before. But this one had been altered. A crimson border now surrounded the emblem. A silent signal. No backup, no communications. Trace. No extraction unless the mission completes. Not a threat. A fact. Rory took it, ran her thumb over the stitching. Then Kane added, without emotion, they cleared your remission. You're activated. Rory didn't respond. She simply reached into her canvas bag, the same one trashed by checkpoint guards hours earlier, and slid the emblem back into its side pocket. Then she zipped it shut, not hiding it this time, holstering it, returning it to service. By the time the briefing ended, she had stripped off her base uniform, pulled on the suit that still fit like second skin, and tightened the final strap. of her old wristband, the one with 3 notches she'd carved herself the night before her first mission, back when her name still meant something only to herself. At 1941, the jet rolled into the dark, silent, purposeful. At 1943, the base's satellite feed reclassified her profile from support to field activated. The checkpoint guards saw it change in real time and said nothing. At 1947, the sky swallowed. The plane whole. Beneath her seat, tucked in the same pocket where oatmeal used to live, the Falcon emblem glinted faintly under the soft red light of the cabin. An old secret, reborn. Altitude stripped sound from her ears long before the horizon. Appeared at 37,000 feet above Afghanistan's southern corridor. The recon jet drifted like a thought through the jet stream, silent, cold, its fuselage wrapped in black polymer skin that drank radar and moonlight alike. Inside, Rory sat alone, eyes closed, breath steady, every nerve sinking back into the operating rhythm she'd once lived by. Attention split into quadrants, memory flowing in lateral stacks, emotion suppressed in favor of mathematics. Below stretched terrain she'd walked once before on foot, under fire, under orders that had left 10 bodies buried in soil that didn't belong to them and 1 child alive who was never supposed to be there. The mission briefing had described an objective: extract the black box, intercept a local handler, disappear. But Rory had seen the timing, the signals, the way the data was found too easily. This wasn't a recovery. It was a test. Or worse, setup. At 0241 local time, the plane banked southeast and dropped to a whispering glide over jagged terrain. She released the seat straps without ceremony, slipped into thermal harness, and sealed the drop mask over her jaw. No countdown, just gravity. And then she was gone. She landed in near silence, her chute absorbing into sand like a black veil collapsing. Crouched, rifle up, scanning. No movement, no wind. Just dust coiled into stillness. It took 8 minutes to reach the compound. Its walls were a low mud brick perimeter designed to look civilian, but too symmetrical, too wide around the edges to be anything but paramilitary. She found an access point near the western power box and waited. The silence was surgical. She slipped. Inside, following the heat trace of the image from the briefing. In a courtyard, box in the center, prisoner kneeling. Except there was no prisoner now, just the box. And the person who stood beside it. A woman dressed in matte black gear, unarmed, face uncovered and unmistakable. Moth. Kane. The same woman who had briefed her 24 hours earlier. For a second, Rory's breath caught. She raised her weapon but didn't fire because the look in Moth's eyes wasn't hostile. It was sad. Moth spoke first. I told you they reactivated Red Falcon. I didn't say who reactivated it. Rory stayed frozen. What is this? Moth's hand stayed visible. They brought us here to see if we'd come willingly. To see who would return. When called, she paused. You're not with JSOC. No one is. Not anymore. The box at her feet hissed a soft venting of heat, a red light blinking once, twice like a heartbeat. Rory stepped closer. What's in it? Proof, Moth answered. Not of our orders, not of their war, but of what they did to us. Rory lowered her weapon by inches. Moth continued, voice calm. You were right. This wasn't about extraction. This was about revelation. She paused. The emblem in your bag, they planted it there. You didn't pack it. I zipped that bag myself. You zipped what they gave you. Behind her, the black box clicked once. Moth nodded toward it. They don't want to control us anymore. They want to erase us entirely. But they needed to see who still responded, who still remembered. Rory's mouth was dry. So they set a trap. No, Moth said. We did. In that instant, the ground shook faintly, not from below, but from above. A vibration across the courtyard. A signal. Rory turned slowly and looked to the eastern sky. A drone formation. Barely visible, but unmistakable. She whispered, "Those are ours." Moth shook her head. "Not anymore." The box hissed again. On its surface, a symbol appeared, not the falcon, not the bolt, but a name. Red Falcon Archive 0.1. It wasn't a weapon. It was a memory vault. Rory stared at it, realization blooming in her chest like fire. This wasn't a strike mission. It was a broadcast. Every mission, every kill order, every denied operation Red Falcon had executed over 15 years was stored inside. And it was now online. Moth turned, voice cold. The moment they scanned your bag, the clock started. The emblem wasn't just symbolic. It was a beacon. We were the trigger. And now the world will see who we really were. Rory stepped back, not out of fear but awe. "You're burning it all down." "No," Moth said. "We're letting them see the ashes." From above, the first signal flickered across the sky, a brief pulse of blue that stretched silently from horizon to horizon. Transmission began. The silence shattered inside bases around the world. Encrypted terminals blinked awake like eyes. In the dark, names decrypted, files unlocked, photos surfaced, and the codename, Valkyrie, Rory's, scrolled across classified feeds seen by presidents, generals, and ghosts. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply lowered her rifle, stepped toward the box, and sat beside Moth. The weight of years finally found a place to settle. The war they had buried had come home. And this time, no one could pretend it didn't exist. The world didn't end with a bang or a siren. It ended with a red notification on 1,000 black screens inside NATO command centers, underground bunkers, aircraft carriers, and embassies. Senior officers stopped mid-sentence as encrypted feeds cracked open like old bones. The emblem appeared. First a falcon clutching a bolt, then a list of names. Some dead, some presumed dead, and others, like Rory Vale, suddenly unerased. She watched it unfold from the room beneath the compound, sitting in the dark beside the still humming black box, her heart calm in the eye of a storm she hadn't fully understood until now. Above her, Moth monitored the stream without emotion, occasionally adjusting the data pulse or muting inbound attempts to sever the signal. Attempts failed. The system was hardened beyond anything conventional. What they had unleashed wasn't a leak. It was a confession machine. A vault they had spent years constructing from fragments of intercepted logs, erased recordings, burn-after-read memos, and ghost transmissions salvaged from the dark edges of Red Falcon's collapse. It had one purpose: to show the cost of silence. The stream reached embassies in Berlin, Tokyo, Canberra, Buenos Aires, Cairo. Former allies blinked at footage of unauthorized strikes, ghost attainments, secret renditions tagged with names of operatives who were supposed to never have existed. Families who had received caskets with no bodies saw, for the first time, what happened in corridors never built on maps. And in one particular Pentagon terminal, an aging general sat motionless as a clip loaded showing his own voice authorizing the liquidation of Asset Valkyrie. In 2011, an order never carried out. Rory saw it too. The date, the location, her own image entering a building in Homs, Syria, 20 minutes before an IED collapsed the wing. They had tried to erase her once before. Not metaphorically, literally. She leaned back, hand resting on her knee, and felt nothing but clarity. There was no rage, no heartbreak, just confirmation. Moth finally spoke. It's reached the final node. Nothing can stop it now. The entire archive will be mirrored and replicated globally within 42 minutes. Rory nodded slowly. And after that, we disappear again, but not as ghosts, as consequences. Outside, the wind shifted, not violent, just different. A change in the weight of the night. They had set fire to the structure that created them, and now it would burn in every direction. Red Falcon wasn't being resurrected. It was being laid bare so that it could never be rebuilt. For Rory, that was enough. Not justice, not vengeance, just the truth, finally free of containment. When she rose from the chair, her knees ached, not from age, but from use. The flight out would be untraceable, silent, uncelebrated. There would be no medals, no apologies, no official record of what had been done tonight. But for the first time in years, she no longer needed any of it. She picked up the emblem and placed it in her palm. It was warm, not with power, but with closure. 3 weeks later, the checkpoint at Falcon Ridge was replaced, not upgraded, removed. The men who had dumped her bag were reassigned without warning. Internal memos marked it as a routine personnel shift, but those who were there knew better. In the supply annex, Rory's desk remained empty. No explanation was given, no box cleared. The drawer still held a faded notebook, one spoon, a metal ring with a burned edge. Across the world, the stream faded slowly from headlines, buried under noise, reclassified under new code names. But something lingered. Not in the news, not in policy, but in silence. In the way younger officers paused at locked doors. In how colonels no longer laughed when a woman stepped into the room. In the occasional whisper when a drone lost signal mid-flight and someone muttered, "Red Falcon." Private Bradford, the young guard who had opened her bag, requested transfer to a supply depot in Montana. His nights were haunted by the memory of that emblem and the way the room had gone silent. He'd started researching military history, trying to understand what he'd witnessed, but found only redacted documents and dead ends. Clipboard Sergeant Jerry Fields was reassigned to a desk job reviewing equipment manifests. His swagger was gone. Coworkers noticed he'd stopped wearing his mirrored sunglasses and rarely spoke above a whisper. The sight of canvas bags made his hands shake. Colonel Marcus Reed, the officer who had defused the checkpoint situation, received a commendation for outstanding discretion in handling classified materials. But late at night, in his quarters, he stared at classified reports that no longer made sense. Names that had been blacklined for years were now connected to operations he'd helped plan. The weight of what he'd participated in, unknowingly, settled on his shoulders like lead. In a small apartment in Tucson, an elderly woman named Margaret Chun opened her door to find a manila envelope with no return address. Inside, a photograph of her son Danny, alive and well, taken 3 months after she'd been told he died in a training accident. The accompanying note was brief. He served with honor. He deserved better than silence. Margaret spent the night crying not from grief, but from relief. Her son had been Red Falcon. Now she knew he hadn't died alone. Similar envelopes appeared in mailboxes across America. Parents who had buried empty caskets finally saw their children's faces. Wives who had been told their husbands were consultants learned they had been heroes. The truth, after years of carefully constructed lies, was coming home. At the Pentagon, Director Elizabeth Warren sat in her secure office, watching the fallout. Reports stream across her monitors. Red Falcon had been her operation from the beginning. Her idea to create a unit so classified it could operate without oversight, without accountability. Now that same secrecy was protecting those who had exposed it. She couldn't hunt down operators who officially didn't exist. She couldn't prosecute missions that were never authorized. She couldn't even acknowledge the leak without admitting to war crimes. Her phone rang. The Secretary of Defense's voice was ice. "This never happened, Beth. Red Falcon never existed. Are we clear?" She stared at the screen showing Rory Vale's service record, officially a logistics coordinator, unofficially the deadliest operative she'd ever recruited. Crystal clear, sir, but it was too late. The truth had its own momentum now. 6 months after the exposure, congressional hearings began in closed session. Senator Patricia Hayes, chairwoman of the Intelligence Committee, had been briefed on Red Falcon's existence only after the leak forced the Pentagon's hand. She sat across from Director Warren, studying the heavily redacted files that told a story of systematic deception spanning 3 administrations. These operations, Senator Hayes said, tapping the papers, were never authorized by Congress. They were authorized under Executive Order 12,333, Warren replied. National security imperatives, imperatives that included assassinating American citizens? The room fell silent. Warren's jaw tightened. Those individuals were enemy combatants who had renounced their citizenship. According to whom? There's no judicial review, no oversight, no accountability. Hayes leaned forward. These operators, the ones who survived, they were abandoned, left to disappear into bureaucratic obscurity or fake their own deaths. Why? Warren's voice was barely a whisper. Because they knew too much. The hearing room erupted. Even the hardened intelligence officers in attendance looked shocked. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun. And now they've told the world what they knew, Hayes continued. Frankly, Director, I'm amazed it took this long. Meanwhile, in a coffee shop in Denver, Rory Vale sat across from Julia Kane, sharing a quiet breakfast. They looked like any 2 middle-aged women catching up former colleagues, perhaps, or old friends. Nothing about their appearance suggested they had once been the most classified operatives in American history. Any regrets? Kane asked, stirring her coffee. Rory considered the question. About the exposure? No. About the years in between? Some. She paused. I regret the silence. The years of pretending those missions didn't matter. That the people we lost didn't matter. Kane nodded. The hardest part wasn't the killing. It was the forgetting we were supposed to do afterward. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 ghosts finally able to speak freely. Around them, the coffee shop buzzed, with normal conversations about normal problems. Neither woman envied that normalcy anymore. What now? Kane asked. Rory smiled, the first genuine smile she'd allowed herself in years. Now we remember. For all of them. In a secure facility outside Quantico, Rashid finished his testimony to a joint FBI-CIA investigation panel. He had spent 6 hours detailing operations that officially never happened, describing targets that were never engaged, recounting conversations with superiors who had never existed. The lead investigator, Agent Patricia Reynolds, closed her notebook with a snap. Mr. Rashid, your testimony today contradicts 15 years of official records. Yes, ma'am. That's because the records were lies. And you expect us to believe that dozens of operations were conducted without any congressional oversight or judicial approval. Rashid leaned back in his chair, scarred hands folded calmly. Agent Reynolds, I don't expect you to believe anything. I expect you to investigate. The evidence is all there now in public databases, leaked files, witness testimonies. All we did was make it impossible for you to ignore anymore. Reynolds studied his face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. She found none. Just the calm certainty of a man who had finally told the truth and was at peace with the consequences. Why now? She asked. Why expose all of this now? Rashid's answer was simple. Because we got tired of being ghosts. 2 years later, the memorial wall at CIA headquarters received its first classified edition in decades. 47 stars were added in a private ceremony attended only by family members who had been living with lies for too long. Margaret Chen was there, wearing her son's red beret, the one she'd been told was just a training memento. She placed her hand on the 33rd star and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Danny. I always was." Private Bradford, now Sergeant Bradford, had been promoted after requesting transfer to the Honor Guard. He spent his days ensuring fallen soldiers received the recognition they deserve, a calling that had grown from his guilt over that morning at the checkpoint. He still dreamed about the Black Falcon emblem, and now it felt less like a nightmare and more like a reminder of the importance of respect. Colonel Reed had retired early and become an advocate for military transparency. His book, The Ghosts We Made, became required reading at the War College, though he never revealed the specific incident that had changed his perspective. Director Warren was quietly reassigned to a policy think tank. She spent her remaining years in government service reviewing intelligence protocols, ensuring that future operations would have proper oversight. She never admitted publicly that Red Falcon had been her creation, but the weight of that knowledge changed her. She established a foundation that provided psychological support to veterans of classified operations, a small penance for the ghosts she had created. Jerry Fields, the former clipboard sergeant, left military service entirely. He became a counselor at a veteran center in his hometown of Nashville, specializing in helping former military personnel transition to civilian life. His experience with power and its abuse had taught him the value of humility. The veterans he counseled never knew about his past, but they sensed something authentic in his understanding of their struggles. The checkpoint incident became legendary among base security personnel, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones about the importance of treating everyone with respect. The lesson wasn't lost on the new generation of guards. You never know who you're really dealing with. On a sunny Thursday morning, 3 years after the exposure, Rory Vale walked into the lobby of the Veterans Administration office in Phoenix. She wore civilian clothes jeans, a simple blue blouse, and worn leather boots. Her white streak had grown more pronounced, but she no longer bothered to cover it. The young clerk behind the counter looked up as she approached. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I'd like to apply for veterans benefits," Rory said simply. "I recently completed my service." The clerk pulled up a form on his computer. "What was your rank and unit, ma'am?" Rory smiled. For the first time in her adult life, she could answer that question honestly. "Lieutenant Commander, Special Operations." Unit classification is no longer restricted. As she filled out the paperwork, Rory reflected on the journey from that humiliating morning at the checkpoint to this moment of simple dignity. The clerk processed her application with routine efficiency, unaware that he was helping a legend reclaim her identity. The irony wasn't lost on her. It had taken the complete destruction of Red Falcon for its operators to finally receive the recognition they deserved, not as ghosts or myths, but as human beings who had served their country and paid a price for that service. Outside the VA office, Julia Kane waited in her car. They had planned to have lunch after Rory's appointment. 2 old friends, 2 survivors, sharing a meal in the sunlight. "How did it go?" Kane asked as Rory settled into the passenger seat. "Surprisingly normal," Rory replied. "For the first time in 20 years, I filled out a government form and told the complete truth." They drove toward the restaurant in comfortable silence. 2 women who had learned that the greatest victory wasn't in staying hidden, but in finally being seen. In her wallet, Rory still carried the cedar token that smelled like home. But now she also carried something else, a simple business card that read, "Aurora Vale, Veteran Advocate." She had found her new mission helping other classified operatives navigate the transition from shadow to light. The Red Falcon emblem sat in a display case in her modest apartment, no longer hidden but no longer worn. It was a reminder of what she had been and what she had overcome. Next to it sat a photo from the memorial service, 47 families finally able to grieve openly for their lost children, spouses, and siblings. That night, as she did every evening, Rory checked her secure email. There were new messages from former operatives around the world, men and women who had spent years in bureaucratic purgatory, finally ready to reclaim their stories. The network was growing. The healing was spreading. She closed her laptop and stepped onto her balcony. The Arizona sky was brilliant with stars, each one a point of light in the darkness. She thought about Rashid, now running a security consulting firm in Virginia. About Kane, who had become a professor of international relations at Georgetown. About the dozens of other operators who were slowly, carefully, building new lives in the light. The checkpoint guards who had humiliated her that June morning had been small men drunk on small power. They had seen her canvas bag as something to be violated, her dignity as something to be stripped away. They never imagined that their petty cruelty would be the catalyst for one of the largest intelligence exposures in American history. But that's how change often begins, not with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but with small moments of injustice that finally push someone past their breaking point. Rory had spent 13 years perfecting the art of being invisible. It had taken one morning at a security checkpoint to remind her of the power of being seen. As she watched the stars wheel overhead, she thought about all the secrets still buried in government files, all the operators still living in shadow, all the families still waiting for truth. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But for tonight, she was content to stand in the light, no longer hiding from who she had been or who she was becoming. The emblem that had once been her burden was now her badge of honor, not for the mission she had completed, but for the courage it had taken to finally tell the world they had happened. Tomorrow, there would be more forms to fill out, more stories to tell, more ghosts to bring home. But tonight, Lieutenant Commander Aurora Vale was simply a woman under the stars, free at last to speak her own name. The truth, she had learned, was worth any price. And sometimes, the smallest acts of disrespect can unleash the most powerful forces of justice. If you've made it this far, you understand that some stories aren't about revenge. They're about reclaiming dignity. Sometimes, the most powerful response to humiliation isn't striking back, but standing up and finally telling the truth. Share this story if you believe that everyone deserves to have their service acknowledged, their sacrifices recognized, and their humanity respected. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Your support helps us bring more incredible true stories of courage, justice, and the human spirit. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most ordinary people carry the most extraordinary secrets.